Hi, Dr. Mayukana of the Psychology Department. The title of Leslie's presentation is The Effects of Verbal Complexity on Reading Comprehension.
Hi, thank you. Well, I'm generally interested in language and how language could shape our memory and experiences. And regarding this study, I wanted to see how such linguistic sensitivity to certain parts of speech, and in this study, namely verbs, can in fact boost our comprehension in some sense. So, you might be wondering, why study verbs? Well, first of all, contrary to popular belief, we do not retrieve nouns and verbs similarly. Rather, we retrieve them with differently distributed neural systems, and support for this has been found with aphasic patients. And aphasics are just individuals who experience language difficulties because they have certain brain lesions or damages to areas of the brain. So one example would be individuals who have damages around the posterior cortical areas of the brain. They experience more impairment in naming nouns relative to verbs, whereas individuals who have damages around the anterior parts of the brain experience more impairment in naming verbs relative to nouns. So, furthermore, compared to nouns, the bulk of linguistic research has largely overlooked the role of verbs in terms of encoding, retrieving, and comprehending information. I'm not trying to downplay the role of nouns here, since they do provide the subject and the context matter of the sentence, but it is the verbs that describe action, establish the relationship between the subject and direct object of a sentence, determine what type of features a subject and a predicate may contain, and for English speakers at least, they are the most difficult to acquire when learning a new language. So, isn't it pretty weird that there's still a gap in the linguistic literature in nouns compared to verbs? So, even considering the dearth of research on verbs, even fewer studies have examined the impact of different verb types on comprehension and memory, namely on complex verb types and simple verb types. And complex verb types are semantically rich verbs. They spur more emotional associations. They are the specific exemplars of their simple verbal forms. And such examples would be smash, class, and grasp. And simple verbs, again, are just the basic, more elementary forms, the elementary verbs of the complex verb forms. So, such as go, hold, run, to, oh, no, not to. Anyway, well, an implicit study that I found related to my interest, it was one conducted by Breeden and colleagues, and he found that brain-damaged patients remembered more complex verbs than simple verbs when they were read a list of short passages and were asked to generate the target verb. Also, in addition to the differential processing of nouns and verbs, we also process information differently on an implicit, namely unconscious, and explicit, namely conscious level. And past research on implicit versus explicit memory suggests that we can boost our explicit memory performance when we process information at a deeper level, whereas if we want to boost our implicit memory performance, we would have to process information at a more shallow level. So while on the topic of processing, there's the levels of processing theory proposed by Craig and Lockhart, and this just suggests that we are more likely to remember items if they are processed at the deepest level. So on the most surface level would be the orthography or spelling, followed by the sound, and then its meaning. And a related study to this theory and to my research would be one conducted by Gentner, and she examined the semantic structures of verbs during sentence recall, and she found that sentences with complex verbs led to higher memory accuracy for object nouns, whereas sentences with simple verbs led to a lower accuracy for memory of object nouns. Another ubiquitous theory in memory research would be the theory of spreading activation, and this follows that we all have mental representations for concepts. So when one concept or representation is activated or brought to our conscious awareness, this information spreads to other interrelated concepts, enriching our informational network. So in relating this to the levels of processing theory, when we have much activation spread because of one concept, this just entails that that information has been processed on a deep level. So, in this study, I explored the impact of different verb types on our comprehension and memory on an explicit and on an implicit level. And furthermore, the spreading activation theory and levels of processing theory would suggest that complex verbs may enhance one's comprehension as compared to simple verbs. So just to reiterate, the levels of processing theory would suggest that explicit memory performance should be boosted for complex verbs rather than simple verbs, whereas predictions may be pretty ambiguous for implicit memory performance. And the spreading activation theory will provide similar predictions. So to examine this, I gave all participants two tasks, implicit memory task and an explicit memory task. And in the explicit memory task, basically they'll just be given a list of 3 passages with either complex target verbs or simple target verbs, and then they would be given a list of theme-based multiple choice questions pertaining to the text. And on the implicit memory task, they'll be given a list of word fragments with a mix of words from the passages and a mix of random words just to compare their performance and whether they remembered or not. And both tasks were programmed on ePrime, which is just a software psychologists use. So in other words, individuals just perform the task on a computer. And in addition, there were 2 conditions, a simple condition in which 43 participants partook in, and a complex condition in which 52 participants partook in. I also had a mixed design in which there was a between subject factor, meaning that I compared results from individuals assigned to the complex condition and results from individuals assigned to the simple condition, and a within subject factor, meaning that all participants experienced both an explicit memory task and an implicit memory task. So the procedure follows. First, they'll be given a passage taken from the test of English as a foreign language. And after that, they'll be given a basic math distractor task just to prevent any immediate rehearsal of the material just read. Then after that, they could finally answer the multiple choice questions relating to the passage. And then this process was repeated 2 more times. And at the end, they completed a list of word fragments. And here's a sample passage from the complex versus simple condition. So you can see, note the verb changes: granted versus gave, worked versus acted, influence versus effect, oppose versus resist, and sample word fragments. And here they would just be told to type in the letters to formulate the first word that comes to mind. And my results indicated that for individuals assigned to the complex condition, explicit memory accuracy was about 64%, whereas implicit memory accuracy was about 22%. Whereas in the simple condition, explicit memory accuracy was about 71%, and implicit memory accuracy was about the same, about 21%. So my results suggest that there is a main effect of memory type, such that the people were more accurate for the multiple choice questions than for the word fragments, and there was also a main effect of the verb type, such that people remembered more information from the simple verb passages than from the complex verb passages. I also found an interaction between memory type and verb type, which just indicates that even within the condition that they were assigned to, performance differed between the tasks assigned. So, contrary to what was hypothesized, participants displayed greater comprehension in the simple condition than in the complex condition. And I was surprised with the results, considering the theoretical framework, but maybe I overlooked these following factors. It could have been the limitations of the research design. It could have been the types of passages that I used. In the studies that I've cited, they've only dealt with comprehension among differing verb types when it comes to short text material. Maybe that's irrelevant when it comes to the more complicated, longer text that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. And also, it could have been the type of target verbs that I used. In the previous studies that I've cited, before choosing their verbs, they asked participants to rate a list of words in terms of how simple they are and how complex they were, and then from then on, they could pick and choose which verbs to use. But for me, I wasn't able to do this given the time constraint. Also, results could be attributed to the greater frequency of simple verbs compared to complex verbs, meaning that maybe because we encounter simple verbs on a day-to-day basis and more frequently, perhaps they're more readily available in our memory stores or informational network. Also, a study by Lavelle suggests that it could also be the flexibility of simple verbs. Perhaps in order to make sense of the more complex text, individuals relied on simple verbs because they're flexible. They could apply in many situations. Like you could say, take my sweater, take my jacket, or take my hand. But you can't say, grab my sweater, grab my cookie, or grab my wife. It just wouldn't make sense unless you want to tell some negative connotations or undertones. So here's some direct applications of my research. This definitely poses some challenges to the levels of processing and spreading activation theories. These theories show that complex verbs may enhance your reading comprehension, perhaps for shorter text, because maybe these complex word forms may process deeper because they may be more distinctive in shorter text. Whereas for me, in my study, perhaps higher frequency or semantic relatedness may be more important in making sense of longer text. Also, just to reiterate again, Concerning the study in the past, we described earlier, complex word forms may be useful for remembering short text material, whereas simple word forms may be more useful for remembering complex material. So just to apply this in a school setting, if you're given a list of principles to learn, let's say the principles of operant conditioning in your learning and basic processes class, or the principles of gravity in a physics class or such, then maybe you could try to incorporate some complex word forms so that they could be more distinctive and process deeper in your memory. And whereas if you have like a whole chunk of lecture notes to interpret, or if you have a whole set of essay questions to prepare for an exam the next day, then maybe you rewrite them in the most simple form to better make sense of them and remember them. So here are my references, and just given the possibilities of my research and its applications, it's just no reason why I love what I do, and I'm so grateful for this experience for allowing me to explore my interests and reinforce what I believe in, and most of all, share my enthusiasm with you. Thank you.
I'm sorry if I did go fast, I'm sorry. There were 21 slides in about like 12 minutes. Okay, any questions? Yes?
What are you planning on majoring in?
I'm a psychology and philosophy major. And I haven't really decided whether I like social cognition more or cognitive psychology. So. Anyone? Yes?
I was wondering if this could have any application for teaching English as a second language.
Yes. In fact, one study I read said that such linguistic sensitivity could be useful when we're trying to learn new words, in the sense that, let's say, when we're learning a new word, we could just think of it in terms of how imageable it is in memory. And when things are more imageable, they encode in our memory twice. So that could definitely help. And also in another study too, we are more likely to process complex word forms when we really master their simpler word forms first. So maybe they could really, again, just really master the basics before proceeding to a higher level.